Welcome to our continuous series of virtual voices focusing on the Sustainable Development Goals. Our speaker today is Mr. Riad Meddeb, who is the Senior Principal Advisor at the United Nations Development Program. He led the development of corporate Rising Up for SIDS. The offer emphasizes rapid, responsive technical and policy support, which can kickstart the climate change development, the blue economy, and digital transformation. Each pillar makes links simultaneously on multiple sustainable development goals. A fourth pillar opens avenues to financing as a crucial enabler of transformation. This aims to provide integrated development solutions for the program. Mr. Meddeb has over 20 years of experience in sustainable development and economics, focusing on technical cooperation and policy advisory support to governments in Africa, Arab states, Asia, and the Pacific regions. During his time at UNDP in Comoros, Riad provided direct support to the President's Cabinet and its delegation to participate in the process that resulted in the SAMOA Pathway Outcome Document in September 2014. Mr. Meddeb has worked closely with the Alliance of Small Island States, providing advisory support to the chair on critical issues related to the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals and the SAMOA Pathway in SID. In this capacity, he represented UNDP at the interagency meetings and processes on SIDS, managed by the UN Office of High Representatives for the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island development states. Over to you, Mr. Meddeb.
Thank you very much, Dr. Durberg. Thank you for inviting UNDP, inviting myself and my team who joined also this is a very important seminar. And I'm very happy to talk today about, as you mentioned, something which is very important nowadays is the small island developing states. The small island developing states, which represent 20% of our UN General Assembly. So they have a weight, they have a certain power, but they are also in the forefront of the climate change. So first of all, allow me to make a short presentation. St. Martin, who are part of the Kingdom of, who are part of the Kingdom of Netherlands. So it's quite interesting in terms of a constituency. So you have 30 UN members, and the rest are 20 non-UN members. So when did we recognize the small and developing states? Is in 1992, United Nations Conference of Rio recognized for the first time the status of the group as a small island developing state, but also the reality in terms of a group. What are they facing? What are they facing is the fact that they are small, the fact that they are facing climate change, the fact they are facing their existentiality every day. So they are divided in three main groups. One is in the Caribbean. The second is in the what we call the Atlantic, Indian Ocean, and South China Sea, which represent Guinea-Bissau, Sao Tome, Cape Verde, Comoros, Seychelles, Mauritius, and you have Maldives, Bahrain, and Singapore. Singapore, a very developed country, is members of the SIDS. The third group is the Pacific one, which is classical from Samoa to Fiji to Vanuatu to Timor-Leste. So it is a very classic. to aggregate the population of all the SIDS is around 65 million people, slightly less than 1% of the world population. Yes, it's a very small in terms of size of population. It's still big in terms of numbers of countries. One country, one vote. Biodiversity is an important issue for livelihood in many small island developing states. And the main industries, as you may know, are usually tourism and fishery, which usually constitute around half of the GDP of the small economy. They are regrouped through the Alliance of Small Island Developing States. This is the main group that they created within the United Nations. And this group is a group of negotiators on climate change. This is a very important group. The group chairs every 4 years. For the moment, the current chair is Antigua and Barbuda until end of 2022. And the previous one used to be Belize, and before used to be Maldives. So it's changing regularly. So the next one's going to be probably one from the African group. Next slide, please. Next. What is a special case for development in the small island developing states? We know clearly that the SIDS face a number of challenges. First, the number one is the remoteness and isolation. So they are remote geographically, and that is something essential to understand in terms of geography. It is 3 main groups, but they are remote geographically. As a result, many SIDS face high import and export costs for goods, as well irregular international traffic in terms of volume. A factor like small size is also important. Small size in terms of markets, small size in terms of population, but it depends. Some of them are just few thousand of people in terms of size of the whole country, and others are few millions if you go to Papua New Guinea. So you can go from Tuvalu to Papua New Guinea. You can go from low-income countries like Comoros to go to a high-income country like you reach to Barbados. Different level of development, different size of population, different vulnerability, but they have common context. They have also something which is very important, is their unique biodiversity. And the COVID-19 highlighted more the vulnerability of the small island developing states. First of all, they are highly reliant on tourism sector. And when COVID-19 appears, the main sector who went down completely was tourism. No tourism, no fiscal space, no fiscal space, no revenue, no revenue, no possibility to import food, no possibility to import energy, nothing. So this is the reality. This is really concrete. This is not when we talk about the COVID-19 gonna exacerbate our situation. No, it killed completely the economies of those countries. Second, they are threatened by climate change. For the last 20 years, it's quite recent. We talk about climate change. We talk about the future impact or some impact of climate change. The SIDS, they are facing climate change every day. They are facing the reality of their environment every day. They're facing, think about in 2018, it was the Hurricane Irma, which erased completely Barbuda. The whole population of Barbuda need to move. In 300 years, it was the first time that a full island had to move. Go to Kiribati in the Pacific. Reality. The country, some islands are sinking. And the country, with the support of Fiji, had bought some territories in Fiji archipelago in order to move the population. They have also another vulnerability which is important, is the energy. They import most of their energy. And for which sector? Mostly first for the population and for the tourism sector, like they import all their food. For which sector? For the tourism sector. They lost their tradition in producing their own vegetables. The society moved to more processed food, which had two main impacts. One, high level of obesity. Second, high level of diabetes. Very important. Good to have a tourism, bring you revenue. The downsides of the tourism is the negative spillover on the health, the negative spillover on the biodiversity, the negative spillover of having the big ships coming and destroying the marine biodiversity. So you have positive and negative situation. Finally, vulnerability to economic shock. Any economic shock, knowing that this country is relying on imports, any economic shock can destroy the little economy that you have in those small island developing states. Next slide, please. We can move on that to the next one. We can move in order to give more time for the dialogue. Next one. How UNDP responded to this situation? UNDP is present in all the small island developing states. We have 1,200 staff on the ground. We are the biggest agency on the ground. Okay, current investment annually is around $466 million. The current portfolio of project in the SIDS is around $1.5 billion. Is it enough? No. Why? We continue developing projects, but what can we do in order to have a transformative development in small island developing states? The main development agenda for the small island developing state, like any other countries, are the 2030 agenda. In addition to the 2030 agenda, in September 2014 was adopted the SAMOA Pathway, which is a proper development agenda only focusing on small island developing states. So imagine a small country has to respond to two main development documents. One, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The second is the SAMOA Pathway. So, and third, with the COVID-19, how they can build forward better, how they can recover in a greener way, in a bluer way. So thinking about it, and after consultation with the countries, we identify three main pillars for the development of the small island developing state that can have spillovers on all the rest. The first one is the climate action. The climate action, next slide, can be on first divided in three main areas. The first one is on, very good. The first one is on the energy transformation, accelerating the energy transition in the small island developing states. We have one objective to provide by 2025, 6 million people having access to renewable energy. We have different vehicles for that. A certain number program that we are developing with the Green Environment Facility and the GCF. But also they will have a joint initiative that we launched during the Climate Summit of the Secretary General in 2019. It was the Climate Investment Platform, which is a coalition of key partners, which are IRENA, the International Renewable Agency in Abu Dhabi, the Sustainable Energy for All, UNDP, and us in partnership with the GCF, the Green Climate Fund. The idea is to support the countries to have access to climate finance. And we have launched this year a big call for proposal for the small island developing state, where we received more than 80 proposals and selected 10 countries, public and private sector. That is one example. The second example is related to adaptation and resilience by 2030. So on that side, UNDP has raised the resilience for more than 1.3 million people and protected 1.1 million hectares of land, 141,000 hectares of marine areas, and 7,800 kilometers of coastline. It's huge. Currently, UNDP is supporting 50 SIDS to implement 24 adaptation projects, and that secured $329 million from grant and leveraging additional $544 million as a co-financier. Assistance for 9 SIDS in helping them to develop additional 10 projects for around $141 million. This is very important. Part of it, we have what we call the Climate Promise, which is the biggest program supporting countries in enhancing their NDCs. And part of them, we have 28 small island developing states. Finally, the last point related to climate action is related to the nature-based solution. UNDP is currently supporting 21 small island developing states through their Reach to Reef initiative and integrate coastal zone management project, and supported 9 small island developing states in the Caribbean and 3 in the SIDS African in using special data for mapping essential life and support areas. Next pillar, that is pillar 1, climate action. Next one, please. The next one is related to the blue economy. Very good. UNDP has one objective, is in its blue economy definition, has one thing is related of the sustainable use of the resources of the ocean. But the second part of the definition is more important, is also the restoration and the adaptation of those resources. That are the key main difference compared to many other partners. We cover the use of the sustainable of the resources and the adaptation and the restoration of those resources, with one main objective, of course, providing livelihood to the countries. Of course, the blue economy is extremely large in small island developing states. We have, I can say that the small island developing state can be called also large ocean states. They own 20% of the EEZ of the world, the maritime territory, 20% of the world. A country like Kiribati, that we talked a little bit about it at the beginning, that some of its islands are sinking, is bigger than any, if you count the ocean territory, is bigger than any European countries. The current portfolio of UNDP in the small island developing state for blue economy is around $210 million, and it is increasing every year. The Global Fund for Coral Reef is a new initiative that we just launched, which is an initiative on 10 years and has 500 million blended finance, which has one main objective, is try to support 9 small and 9 small SIDS in order to protect their ecosystem. In Fiji, this same program is helping to launch the first blue bond of Fiji. That is one thing. We work also on putting in place regulatory and institutional framework for developing blue economy policies. It is important to have a strategy, but without a policy, so a regulatory framework, it is very complicated to move forward. Third is on innovative and technology and solutions. We have currently 10 accelerator labs in small island developing state, covering 75% of all the small island developing state. One of them, which is in Barbados, is a blue lab, has one objective, using new technologies in support of the blue economy. For example, they have submarine drones in order for them to control the the fishery resources that they have in the island. There are many new technology which is used in the blue economy beyond the regulatory, institutional, beyond also the financial instrument. Next pillar, it's related to digital transformation. How the countries and how the SIDS can benefit from the fourth industrial revolution. So that is one of the key elements that we are providing in small island developing state. As I mentioned, we have put in place 10 accelerator lab, and this accelerator lab has one objective to approach the development through local solutions in collaboration with the private sector and civil society and research center. But it is not approached by a certain numbers of program and project like classical what we do in UNDP. Is disrupting the approach of development, which is quite interesting. Approaching to innovation, approaching to digital solution for sustainable development. So many solutions were brought during the COVID-19. For example, if we talk about Guinea-Bissau, they have developed a platform to be able to follow the case of COVID. If you take in Fiji or in the Atoll Island in the North Pacific, they have developed certain numbers of solutions regarding the erosion of the coastal erosions of the atoll and the possibility for them when they can move the population. Another example is also what we are currently doing with our sister agency, UNCDF, on digital inclusive finance, and also a training that we have just finalized, an online training for supporting all the small island developing state on digital transformation, explaining the main difference between digitalization, digital economy, digital transformation. What is it? What are the opportunities for diversifying the economies, for allowing the country to adopt new development model through digital solutions? And that's how we are doing now in building the capacities of the countries. Next slide. So you have three main pillars. Of course, as you mentioned, Dr. Durbach, there is always one which is very important, remain important, is access to innovative finance. Access to innovative finance, it is interesting to have three pillars which are interconnected, and I repeat, climate action, blue economy, digital transformation, interconnected, and they are implemented at the same time in order to accelerate reaching all the other sustainable development goals and the objective of the SAMOA Pathway. But the other element helping us as an enabler is access to finance. Access to finance, which is on, we are creating a center, establishing a certain issuing a certain number of blue bond, green bond, insurance instrument, debt restructuring through nature. So there are many instruments that we are currently developing in partner with the other actors. One element which is very important, and that the SIDS are keep fighting and non-stop, and even during the COP26, is recognizing their own vulnerability, their own specificity. They are very different than other countries. You're going to tell me, yes, the LDCs will request a recognition of their statute. Any country can request, any category of country can request, but the SIDS are facing a different situation. UNDP is supporting the Secretary General initiatives on developing a multidimensional vulnerability index. And this multidimensional vulnerability index that we have developed in UNDP on 4 dimensions, which is environmental, economic, financial, and social, help the countries to be able to calculate what are precisely their vulnerability. And if we take into account not only the level of their GDP, but the level of the vulnerability, the SIDS, through the MVI, will be able to have access to a certain level of concessional financing that it will have never access if they were only considered through the level of GDP. This multidimensional vulnerability index takes into account certain elements which are characteristic to the SIDS. One is their remittances. Second, the foreign direct investment. Third, the classical economic and social and environmental and biodiversity element that are taken into account in the VI index, which is the element which help us to classify the least developed countries. Next slide, please. After the multidimensional vulnerability index, we can move. This multidimensional vulnerability index also was the element that, thank you very much, was the element that was used by the small island developing states, not only for negotiating with the international financial institutions, but also during the COP26 and the forthcoming COP27, in terms of trying to, when they negotiate, trying to put up front their own specificity. It was important that they had the possibility to calculate their own multidimensional vulnerability index. There are many multidimensional vulnerability index exists in the world for the small and developing state. And through in 2022, there is a UN resolution. We will allow the Secretary General to come up with a new one that everybody will agree upon it. So, few cases on success stories from small island developing states. The first one in the Pacific. The Pacific has recorded issue of disruption to food value chain. And during the pandemic, we realized that the cost of accessing food at the supermarket and municipal market has soared in the region. And there are high risks associated with the movement due to COVID-19 restrictions. This is the reality and the context that you have. Taking into account this consideration, UNDP Pacific Accelerator Lab embarked on a journey with Isaac Akai, a locally owned food delivery business based out of Port Vila in Vanuatu, that provide access to reasonably priced grocery for minimum wage workers who were facing pay cuts during the pandemic. And together with Isaac Akai, we crafted a few hypotheses. Can private sector network be possible solution for integrating supply chain? One. Can home deliver food pack be a sound way of delivering value to low-income group post-disaster, or can private sector fill the gap? Of course, we had a success here. We had a success in Barbados, same thing. Imagine Barbados, highly dependent on tourism, okay? We are in a situation that there's no tourism, no boat. Fishermen still fishing for fish, but they cannot sell it. Farmers still producing vegetables and fruit, but they cannot sell it. The Accelerator Lab has developed a simple e-commerce platform and used the taxi that used to transport all the tourists to transfer directly the food and the fishermen to the population. And that's a kind of innovative way, and it's a way of demonstrating their resilience facing the crisis. And that gives you hopes for the future. We also have done in the Caribbean a certain numbers of solutions regarding early warning and emergency responses. There are many other examples that I can go through, but I won't mostly go to more debate than presenting all the cases. Next slide, please. So we presented. So you can show this. You can go back and you can show this this one where Cabo Verde. Yes, this one is the Caribbean. I talked this is kid in Vanuatu. Very interesting how the private sector works with the communities and respond to a situation. You have the next slide, please, which is related to the Caribbean or the ACE region. This one is very interesting in Cabo Verde, what the government, Cabo Verde, situation very complicated. Political instability, it's also a disease who just graduated. So it's a very complicated situation. And how the youth came up with solutions regarding access to data information regarding following the health. And they have also developed a digital platform regarding tourism. Next slide, please. Looking ahead. That is very important. One of the biggest number, and you know that we will consider the biggest smaller number of our lifetime is 1.5 degrees Celsius. Very important. You know that if we do not respond to Paris Agreement, if we do not implement the commitment we agreed in Glasgow, and if we reach 2 degrees Celsius, some of the small island developing states will disappear. This is a question of existence. This is not what we are talking in 10 years, is now. And this is what they are facing. In the latest studies from UNEP, if we keep the ongoing path, temperature will rise to 2.4 Celsius. How many countries will disappear? Should we keep hope? Should we remain positive? Yes. Should we be realistic? Absolutely. Absolutely. It is very important that we remain positive, and it is very important that we know what is the reality of our countries. Why are we hopeful? Is from pension fund divestment from fossil fuel to countries phasing out of coal power to the energy that continue to be maintained by young people, indigenous communities, citizens demanding changes that we see in the street during all those big events. We are seeing a global shift, unlike anything that has come before. But at the same time, hope remains, yet our window to protect people and our planet is closing each day. And our Secretary General mentioned one thing which is very important. When he finished the COP26, he said, I know that you are all disappointed. I know that you were expecting a more ambitious results. But sometimes progress are not always a straight lines. There are also some detours. Sometimes there are ditches. But quoted, he said, I know we can get there. We are in the fight of our lives, and this fight must be won. Never give up, never retreat, keep pushing forward. And my main message, fight all of you. Whatever you do every day will change the life of the small island developing state. Refusing a plastic bag when you do your grocery shop, refusing buying your coffee in a plastic cup is very important. Anything that you do here will impact the other countries. Anything you do in your community will impact the other part of the community. The approach on facing the climate change is inclusivity. Inclusivity in reaching the one who are left behind, inclusivity within the country, inclusivity within the society, inclusivity between the countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meddeb. It was really an eye-opening presentation for most of the people that basically know about the low-island states, know about the potential of the complete submerging of the islands, which was discussed in the last couple of meetings at the UN. And as you know, the people that came and talked about it, but bringing it to focus so that young people can learn and continue focusing on getting the authorities and getting the governments to get together to do what we need to do, forwarding to Susie Halleck so that she can read all the questions that we have received so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Durbach, and thank you, Riad, for such an informative presentation. We have some questions here from the participants. First question is, in your opinion, in the context of globalization, when everything is somehow influenced by more of the large and powerful countries, will the island countries be able to preserve their identity? And is there a risk for island countries to disappear from global warming and rising ocean levels?
Okay, it's a very large question. Is there a risk for them disappearing? It started. So this is very clear. That's what I mentioned. If you talk about countries, remember just what, 15 years ago when we had the president of Maldives who had a cabinet meeting underwater. And that was 15 years ago, talking about we are sinking. Kiribati, same thing. Tuvalu, same thing. Many islands are facing on the front line of the climate change. Who has the responsibility? All the countries are responsible. In terms of gas emission, the small island developing states are responsible less than 1%. All what is happening in all the countries, the big emitters, impact the life of the small island developing states. Are they going to lose their culture, their biodiversity? I think one of the main assets of the small island developing states are the biodiversity, are the land biodiversity and marine biodiversity, are the culture, what we call the creative industry, the orange economy. That's how they are able to be innovative in finding solutions on diversifying their economy through the orange economy and using their culture as a way of reinventing tourism. Not the tourism that we see now, the mass tourism, but another tourism which was mostly focused on going back to the roots, a tourism that rebuild the biodiversity and the nature of the countries. A tourism can be of a country which can be completely virtual, digital, and there are many examples now, and virtual reality and visiting a country, and you're still receiving the handcraft in your country. You are sitting in New York, and you will receive the handcraft produced in their country and not produced in another country at the cheapest cost. So yes, they are incubators of innovations. Yes, they are ambitious for their future, and they fight. They don't wait people to fight for them. They fight. But yes, they need solidarity if we want them to continue to exist. And the economies should not only depend on tourism or fishery. Is when we bring this dimension of blue economy and we talk about large ocean state and not small island developing state, we see the potential in terms of adopting new development model in the small island developing states.
Thank you so much. The second question is, what prediction can you make for small island developing states over the next 10 years? What future awaits them? And are there any large-scale plans like the blue economy build out that you mentioned what new UN programs of action in support of SIDS can be expected in 2022 or beyond?
Okay. I cannot have any prediction because if I was able to have some prediction, I will have already some solutions already. But what can I say? There are a few things which are important and give us some hope. Before COVID-19, we were on the right track for responding to the SAMOA Pathway, the development agenda of the Small Island Developing States, and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. COVID-19 came, impacted negatively, increased poverty. A lot of people are without jobs. But in the meantime, with a certain solidarity, some economies started to transform to avoid external shocks and not dependent on 2-3 main economic sectors, which are usually the tourism, the fishery. So how can they move differently? If you take into account the size of the 65 million people of all the small island developing states, you'll be surprised to know that 60% of the 65 million people are urban. In the cities, we live in the cities. We do not live on the beach. On the beach is for the tourists. The reality is in the cities. The main investment that we are currently doing is how to have smart island, smart cities, smart island. It's a derivative of the strategy that was developed by Singapore and implemented in certain numbers of countries like we can say Mauritius is very advanced on that side. Is how to live in an urban area with new services, with new way of working. We have finalized lately a new analysis on drones, how the drones are used in urban area in the small island developing state, and what kind of solution can they provide, day-to-day solutions. In 2024 is the end of the SAMOA Pathway, and for sure the conference on the small island developing state, reviewing what could be the new development agenda for the small island developing states. And why am I positive? Because it's the only group who has its own development agenda, specific to them. And why am I positive? Because the work that we are doing UNDP with all the key actors, UN sister agencies or development partner, civil society, private sector play a key role in investing in 3 main pillars that we consider them as accelerator for sustainable development. We think this is the way forward for being able to recover in a better position than what they were. We don't want to go back to the former model of development. We want them to lead and to continue to support them in leading their new development model. Not only accessing to concessional financing. As you may know, you have two low income countries in the SIDS, 27 middle income countries, and the rest are high income countries. But the high income countries are highly indebted. Highly indebted, it means they do not have access to concessional financing. Not having to concessional financing, they cannot recover. That's the reason why we have developed a multidimensional vulnerability index, helping the countries who have access to finance, but also helping the countries to engage to structural reforms. By identifying precisely their vulnerability, you can have structural reforms and diversify completely your economy.
Thank you so much. Now focusing on the citizens who are living in poverty in these areas, where do people who have left their homes due to natural disasters most often migrate?
It depends. You've seen the reality of Haiti, earthquake. Usually they are still in the same territory in refugee camps. That is a reality. But other countries are different. When we have the Hurricane Irma, the the population of Barbuda moved to other islands of the archipelago. When we are in, I said, for example, Kiribati, they moved to some territories that they bought in Fiji. So they are reality, but the main question is the following. If I am thinking, how do I define a state? It is very important. You're moving the population to another territory, which is in another country, because you bought the land. So you have the right to move your population. But is land is considered as the new state, or is it the host state? How do you define a state when this state is facing climate change every day? That is an existential question that we need to ask every day, because it has legal issues, because perhaps you lose your land, but you still own the maritime territory, which is huge. What kind of resources you can have those maritime territories?
Excellent, thank you. So what role is dedicated to women in a project for the development of small island developing states?
All our projects, of course, we are UN, which is normal. All our projects are gender sensitive, and we have indicators on all of them. Are there some initiative led by women in terms of development? Let's take a country where I used to live in Comoros. They are the first producer of a flower called ylang-ylang, which is the 60% of the world production. Ylang-ylang is collected, and like vanilla, are collected only by women. Ylang-ylang, without ylang-ylang, you have no perfume in the world, because ylang-ylang is the flowers that fix the perfume. It is a very delicate flower that you can collect at a certain time in the morning, very early, and only women can do it. What do I mean? This is a society which is matrilinear and not patrilinear. So the woman is earning the money. The woman is a trader, travels in the world, buy product, bring and sell them in the country. This is a very interesting Muslim country, matrilinear, and the houses are owned only by women and not by men. This is completely different than what we can think.
Yeah.
So if you marry a man, he's invited to your house. When you want to divorce him, you put his suitcase at the door. He can leave. And when you have your first daughter, your daughter will get a house. The first thing that they will do, because you want to protect first the women. And they lead the development of the country. Men are on politics. Women, they do the main important part.
That's a great way to look at it.
I prefer a combination of men and women, but I can see where this probably would work in some parts of the world very effectively.
Now, going back to the climate change issue we were talking about earlier, what political organizations provide assistance in solving the problems of sustainable development in small island states? As we were mentioning earlier, some of the more powerful countries are the ones who have typically caused some environmental issues that the small island states are dealing with. So who's really helping them in solving these problems?
So first of all the UN agencies are helping them. Many bilateral partners, development partners are helping them. But one thing which is very important, they are leading their own development and they are organizing themselves at the regional level. Take CARICOM in the Caribbean. Take the Pacific Island Forum in the Pacific. Take the Indian Ocean Conference, which is located in Mauritius. They are regrouping themselves for finding regional solutions. And that is something very important. but they are also leading their own development. In the climate summit, you'd be surprised that they come up with their own climate package. They were not waiting for countries to have them. They have developed that package, identifying their priorities, identifying the solutions, and inviting other partners to join them in their pathway for sustainable development. And that is something very important, recognizing. They are leading their development. They are not waiting. They are leading their development, but they invite the other to support them. And that is essential to recognize in some countries. The leadership is very important. The leadership is at the national level, the leadership it has the 3 regional level, but the leadership is also at the group level in the UN through the Alliance of Small Island Developing States.
That's great. And so how do you feel about people who are against mobilizing financial and human resources and providing the required funding to SIDS?
I do not think there are people who do not want to provide.
Mm-hmm.
This is not what I see. There are many who want to support. Is it enough? Is it as fast as they need? That is the main question. Taking into account the reality of climate change, is it not enough? We have to go much faster. That's why the position of the Small Island Developing States in COP26 in Glasgow was really prominent. They were everywhere. They won few issues, few battles, not everything, but it's just a beginning. And they have to continue to fight, as the Secretary General said, fight, fight, fight. There's no other way. Protect your planet, you protect all the people.
Agreed. I attended COP26 this year, so agreed with the collaborative momentum and outlook that you have. So going on to, I know you touched on COVID-19 a bit in your presentation. How would you summarize the way COVID-19 affected the economy of small island developing states and the development of the blue economy solution you discussed?
Heavily negatively. As I said from the beginning, when we identified the different vulnerability of small island developing states, that they import their energy, they import their food, they are really dependent on transport, they are isolated, they are very small market, they are not attracting a lot of foreign direct investment, they depend on the remittances, big part of the populations are living abroad, and also they go for studying abroad. So all this was disturbed, which shrink completely the fiscal space. When you do not have a fiscal space, it means you do not have revenue to invest. If you do not have revenue to invest, the population loses its own livelihood. Many of them, to protect the health of the population, they close completely the countries. Take Samoa. I think they just reopened and not to tourists. Can you imagine 2 years, the country closed, completely closed? No revenue. Take Fiji. A disaster. They were heavily affected, which increased their debt. And that is the main problem. Increasing the debt is not an easy situation for a small island developing state. What they need is to have access to fresh resources, concessional financing. But for accessing to concessional financing, they need to have support for engaging transformative and structural reforms, economic reforms, because they cannot have the same economic model, which is exposed to external shocks. That's why the idea of developing the blue economy linked to the digital transformation, linked to climate action, will help them to develop new sectors and create new jobs. And this is what we've done in certain areas in Fiji, where we train all the workers, the power force that were working for the tourism sector in other areas. There are other options, for example, replacing the import of food, processed food, by returning to traditional production of vegetables and fruit that they used to have. Second, by accelerating the energy transition to be able to adopt digital and vertical agriculture, you know, those urban farming that we are doing and testing in certain numbers of small island developing states, including in Vanuatu. There are a few examples which works very, 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 very well. This is the future. And this is where we call transforming their way of life, transforming their development. It's not rebuilding what they had before and now perhaps COVID reduced for 6 months, we open a little bit of tourism, we have another now variant, again, we're gonna close. No. What they want is to see what are different other sectors they can develop and create jobs for the youth. And that's where the role of the youth is very important, and the role of women is very important in the future.
Riad, in your opinion, how can the scarce transport and communication connections of small island states with other countries be improved?
How can transport can be improved with the other countries? Oh, it depends. It depends. So if you really want to change your mind and going back to nature and go build with those countries the future of their development, you have new model of tourism that is developed, and now some airlines are back in the small island developing state. Not all of them, unfortunately. Take into account, yes, it's a small paradise. They don't have only the beaches, the nature, but they have this very famous culture. Go to a Polynesian culture. After that, you go to a Cape Verdean culture, and you go to Cuba culture, or Haiti, one of the richest in the Caribbean. For me, this is one of the most important assets and huge potential for the future. In terms of transport, there will be always a link with the other countries, because they are always dependent on import for the moment until they would be able to transform their economy. So are there big markets? They are much smaller market. The main approach for them for developing transport is the negotiation as a regional grouping and not as a national country, because they are too small to be able to attract investors in transport. But one thing what we need to continue to invest, and we are only at the beginning, is the marine cables for telecommunication. That brings them to the level that they need. For example, go to the Pacific. So you have the University of South Pacific. It's interesting, but you cannot do too much there. So you're obliged to migrate when you're a young student to New Zealand, to Australia. The solution can be brought through you connecting different universities, if we have a good speed of internet, and having hologram courses. And it started, for example, with the American Samoa. Hawaii is teaching in American Samoa in holograms. The idea of developing it in all the Pacific, especially starting by Fiji, is a huge possibility. Why traveling when you can live with your family and you can still have access to the same level of education? Why traveling when you have a minimum of medical facility and you can have in hologram a doctor? And this is what I'm talking is not the future, it is what is happening. When some doctors are doing operations from their university, hospital university, in another country, and supporting the local doctors in doing an operation. This is the future. For me, the main problem is not only physical transport, is the telecommunication. How to have access to telecommunication to remain global and not to be isolated.
Thank you. So going back to some of the innovative ways you and solutions you presented about providing sustainable financing and digital scale solutions to SIDS. Do you have a favorite or a specific solution that you think is most promising in terms of providing sustainable financing and digital scale?
On digital scale, the first thing that you have to do is to review what do you have in the country? What do you have in terms of regulatory and institutional framework? Because digital, digital is not neutral. It can have a negative impact as it can have a positive impact. How do you make sure that you reinforce the capacity of the government and the capacity of the country to have the regulatory, the laws which are necessary, the institutions which are necessary in order to have access to digital solutions? So you need first to clean the regulatory and the institutional framework, first of all. Second, this is what we are doing, and I have one of my colleagues here connected, Laura, who is leading all our work on digital transformation in small and developing state by deploying a digital readiness assessment, which is one of the instruments allowing you to know what do you stand in terms of digital, what are the bottlenecks, and how you can move forward in order to respond to the priorities in terms of sustainable development. One. On innovative finance, same thing. Having access to blue bond or green bond is one thing, but don't forget, it is also increasing your debt. So you need to know how to balance access to innovative finance and managing and restructuring your debt. That swap for nature are one of the examples that we are currently doing in some countries in collaboration with World Bank, with the Caribbean Development Bank, it depends which country, or with the Asian Development Bank.
Thank you.
Okay, there's another question that came, and it says, thank you for your invitation, and I have a question. Many islands will go underwater due to rising water levels and extraction of sand from the seabed. What can be done to save them? Do you have any recommendations?
Of course, we are the UN. Our role is to protect absolutely the biodiversity, and the extraction for us, we have no program will be supporting any kind of extraction. Is the opposite. What kind of nature-based solution we can find in that? And this is what we are doing through our program Raising Up for SIDS. We identify the nature-based solution developed with the communities in order for them to protect their environment. You can change your way of living if you find your own solution. We are doing it through a program which is quite interesting called the Small Grant Program, with very small amount of resources that we give to the community to develop their own resources. Taking the one in Mauritius, they have regrouped. It's very interesting. One of Mauritius, we all dream, we think it's only the 5-star hotels. No, 5 years ago, we have developed a Marshall Plan against poverty. There is the thing that you see. It's very advanced on finance, on digital, but there's poverty. What have we done? In some area, the poorest area of the main island, we have regrouped women who are living alone with only children, who have no access to education. We train them to grow the old herbs, verbena, mint, and create their own mix. And now, guess, where are they exporting their product? China. Where do you find them? Free shop of airport. What do they do with the revenue? They created a school where they are growing the herbs. How do they dry the herbs? Solar panel. So there are many solutions. Take the examples. I can give you many examples on how they protect, for example, the one that I was working on in Comoros, how they were protecting the marine turtles in the north of the island. And this is wonderful. They protected marine turtles, they train eco guards, they are protecting them, and they create tourist guides on nature-based solution, and they bring those tourist guides by those tourists in order for them to develop solutions with the communities, and they live with the communities. They eat what is produced in the communities and nothing what is important. Small solutions like that are the reality of the SIDS and the day-to-day reality.
That is an excellent example what to end on. Knowledge is power, as we always say. And if you can provide education and also equality and support the integration of men and women to working together, I'm sure they will be able to find some problems for the future. Thank you very, very much. I'm most grateful that you were able to make it. And Susie, thank you for the questions. And so have a very, very good day. And I'm sure now you'll be able to go and have a nice rest.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting us. It was a real pleasure for the discussion.
Thank you.
And have a nice day.
You too. Bye-bye.